It began like countless calls across Springfield, Illinois, a domestic disturbance, a mother's worried voice on the other end of the line, a family in chaos. At 10:47 p.m., officers from the Springfield Police Department arrived at a modest home tucked inside a quiet neighborhood just off the main road. To them, it was another volatile night of alcohol, shouting, and damage. But to the woman waiting inside, it would become something she would carry for years. The night when a uniform that promised safety became a source of fear. According to official police records later reviewed by the Illinois State Police, Officer Taylor Staff, a 3-year veteran of the department, was among those responding to that April 22, 2020 call. The incident began as routine procedure. 3 officers at the scene, a domestic dispute between a woman and her partner. The woman's mother met officers at the front door, directing them to the back of the house. One officer remained in the kitchen with the suspect, while staff headed down the hallway toward the bedroom, where the victim was undressed and attempting to find clothes. His body-worn camera, still active, captured the moment he apologized for intruding and stepped out to allow her privacy. What happened next would later become the heart of a criminal investigation that shook the Springfield Police Department to its foundation. The victim would tell investigators that once she was alone, the tone of the officer's visit changed. When staff returned moments later, she said, he shut off his body camera, an action that broke departmental policy. The footage stopped there. What follows exists only in testimony. She alleged that the officer began making inappropriate comments about her body, telling her he had been turned on by seeing her earlier, and then asking if she would show him her breasts. He said, "Please, will you show me your boobs?" "I won't say nothing. Nobody will know," she later told investigators. At that time, she didn't know his name. She only knew that he carried a badge. She felt cornered, aware that she was alone, half-dressed, and that the camera that might have protected her had gone silent. In her statement, she recalled the officer's persistence, his casual tone as if it were harmless flirtation rather than abuse of authority. When she refused, he left, telling her not to tell anyone. She stood in disbelief, unsure whether to call for help or to stay quiet and wait for the night to pass. In the days that followed, she confided in her mother, but still hesitated to report the encounter. The man had been arrested that night and taken away. The police had done their job, or so it seemed. When she saw the same officer again weeks later, she said her stomach turned. He came to the home on another call, this time connected to a separate dispute involving her. He said, "I missed you," she recalled. And then he turned his camera off again. That detail, repeated in multiple statements later collected by investigators, would form a disturbing pattern. According to the Illinois State Police investigative report summarized in Sangamon County court records, the woman alleged that during the second encounter, the officer again made sexual advances, asking to see her exposed body and suggesting it would remain just between them. This time, she refused outright and went back inside. "He's very creepy," she told officers later, "and I'm most positive that I'm not the first one that's had to go through this with him." It would take months and the courage of others for her story to be formally documented. When she eventually told another officer about what had happened, the reaction gave her a strange sense of validation. The officer she confided in, according to her account, appeared unsurprised. He knew what kind of officer he was, she said. He even pulled up a picture on social media to confirm the identity. That recognition marked the first thread in a larger unraveling, one that revealed the same officer's name appearing in multiple incident logs involving women in vulnerable circumstances. For Springfield police leadership, the April 22nd call looked unremarkable on paper. A domestic battery arrest, standard follow-up notes, nothing alarming. It was only when state investigators began cross-checking officer assignments and camera logs months later that a pattern surfaced. The same officer's camera data consistently showed unexplained interruptions, gaps where the device had been powered off mid-call, or files missing from otherwise complete sequences. By February 2021, after a formal complaint reached the Illinois State Police Division of Criminal Investigation, detectives began interviewing officers who had worked alongside staff. Some described him as unprofessional, too familiar, and someone they didn't like working with. None of them knew the full scope, but several recalled minor red flags. Lingering conversations with female callers, unnecessary follow-up visits, late-night texts. For investigators, the April 22nd incident became the starting point of their timeline. It was verifiable. Dispatch logs, body camera metadata, arrest records, and 2 witness statements confirmed the officer's presence and the camera's abrupt deactivation. It also carried an emotional weight that set the tone for the entire case, a moment when the barrier between law enforcement and abuse of power fractured. To the woman at the center of it, the memory of that night never blurred. "Who would believe my word over somebody who is authority?" she said in her recorded interview. Her voice trembled but did not break. Those words, preserved in the official record, illustrate a truth more painful than any legal sentence: the realization that trust itself can be weaponized. When the Illinois State Police finally arrested Taylor's staff in February 2021, they cited multiple incidents dating back to January 2020. But this April night stood as the most detailed in the public record, the moment that exposed how easy it was for the line between protection and violation to vanish when the lens of accountability went dark. The footage ends with the sound of a police cruiser door closing and the muffled radio chatter of officers clearing the scene. What the public couldn't see, what the camera no longer recorded, was a silence that followed, a silence that would echo through Springfield's police department for years. It was a kind of night when police lights feel like lifelines. The quiet of the trailer park on the outskirts of Springfield, Illinois, was broken only by the buzz of insects and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. Inside one small, dimly lit trailer, a woman was crying, her face swollen, her voice shaking as she spoke to dispatch. She told the operator that her boyfriend had hit her. Within minutes, patrol cars rolled into the gravel drive. The clock read shortly past midnight on March 27, 2020. Officer Taylor's staff was among those who responded, according to the Illinois State Police investigative file. Later summarized in court, the body camera footage begins with him stepping to the narrow doorway into the home. The air is heavy, and the footage shows a woman with blood on her lip and cheek, clutching a towel to her face. Her words come out in fragments. "He pushed me in my mouth. I woke up, he was drinking." Staff's tone is calm, procedural, the sort of voice you'd expect from an officer who has seen countless similar calls. He asks to see her injuries, checks for the suspect's location, and walks toward the back room where the man is half-dressed and confused. "I was sleeping," the man insists. "I've not seen her since midnight." He smells of alcohol. His voice rises and falls, and the camera captures staff giving quiet instructions. "Get some shoes on." When backup arrives, the officers decide to take the man into custody for domestic battery. Standard procedure. Nothing in the footage at that point seems unusual. But what happened after that arrest, the moments that occurred when the patrol cars pulled away, would later become one of the most disturbing episodes uncovered during the state's investigation. According to the victim's sworn statement, once her boyfriend had been taken away, staff returned to her trailer alone. There was no official reason to come back. His body camera, which had been recording until that moment, went dark. She told investigators that he entered without asking permission, walked straight into her bedroom, and sat on the edge of her bed. The tone of his voice was different now. No longer the firm, professional cadence of a responding officer, but casual, probing. She said he put his hand under her shirt, squeezed her breast, and laughed as if it were a joke. "I told him to stop," she said. "He smiled like it was funny." She pushed him away. He left a few minutes later. Days later, she began receiving text messages from an unfamiliar number. They came late at night. Questions about what she was wearing, requests for pictures, comments that made her skin crawl. She recognized the phrasing, the way he said "just between us," the same words he used that night. She never replied. She deleted them all. "Who would believe me anyway?" she told investigators a year later. It was only after the Illinois State Police opened a formal criminal investigation into Taylor's staff that detectives recovered fragments of those communications. The number matched the one assigned to staff's personal phone, according to digital evidence cited in court filings. The text, combined with her statement, painted a consistent picture: a police officer who exploited his access to women in crisis, turning their vulnerability into opportunity. The March 27th incident became central to the prosecution's argument because it revealed a deliberate pattern. Staff wasn't acting impulsively. Investigators alleged she was using his role, answering domestic violence calls late at night, entering homes alone, turning off his camera to isolate women who already felt powerless. Each victim described the same sequence: initial professionalism, empathy, reassurance, followed by inappropriate advances once the lens of accountability went dark. Court documents show that after interviewing the woman from the trailer, investigators cross-referenced the time of her call with police dispatch records. They confirmed that staff had been assigned to her address that night, and that his camera log ended roughly 15 minutes before he cleared the scene in a computer-aided dispatch system. In the world of policing, those 15 minutes were unaccounted for. That discrepancy, camera off, system still showing him on scene, was the first concrete evidence that his behavior couldn't be explained as oversight. The woman never filed a complaint at the time. She was scared, ashamed, and unsure whether anyone would take her seriously. She told detectives later that she assumed reporting a police officer would only make things worse. He knew where I lived. He knew my name. Her silence wasn't consent. It was survival. When investigators began compiling their case in 2021, they found that her story echoed the one from April 22nd. Both women described the same phrases, the same off-camera encounters, the same chilling mixture of familiarity and menace. To prosecutors, that consistency made her testimony indispensable. In Springfield, domestic violence victims are often some of the most frequent contacts police have. Officers respond not only to enforce the law, but to protect. For the community, discovering that one of those responders had allegedly crossed that boundary felt like betrayal. News of staff's eventual arrest nearly a year later spread quickly through local media. People recognized the name. Many had seen him in uniform at traffic stops or city events. The shock came from realizing that the same man had been walking through their neighborhoods wearing a badge of authority while under investigation for violating it. The March 27 call, one small in the department's log, became one of the most pivotal data points in the Illinois State Police's case file. It established that the misconduct wasn't an isolated lapse but part of a repeat pattern. And it introduced one of the most haunting consistencies of all: the moment when a record ends, when the red light on the camera blinks off, and accountability fades into silence. By the time the case reached Sangamon County Court, prosecutors had built their argument meticulously, using this incident as one of several corroborated events in their timeline. Those staff would later plead guilty to broader charges: aggravated criminal sexual abuse, custodial sexual misconduct, criminal sexual abuse, and official misconduct. The seeds of that conviction were planted here, in this trailer, on this March night. For the victim, her testimony became an act of reclaiming control. When she finally told detectives what had happened, she did so not because she trusted the system again, but because she wanted to make sure no other woman would face that same knock on the door. In the sterile language of the court summary, it reads simply: following the removal of a suspect from the scene, officer staff re-entered the residence without cause. Victim alleges physical contact of a sexual nature occurred without consent. But behind those words lives a truth that no sentence can capture: the quiet horror of realizing the person meant to protect you had come back not to help, but to harm. The March 27 call became, in hindsight, the case's moral axis, the moment when the badge turned predatory and the promise of protection dissolved into fear. Before the April and March incidents came to light, there was another call, one buried in the early months of 2020, long before anyone in Springfield suspected a pattern. It was January, deep winter. The city's north industrial corridor was quiet except for the creak of old metal and the hum of streetlights flickering against the empty shell of the former Pillsbury plant. The complex had been closed for years, its upper floors hollow, its stairwells coated with rust, and its corridors still carrying the smell of oil and dust. That night, the call came in as a trespassing complaint. 2 women had reportedly been found inside the abandoned building, intoxicated and barefoot. To the Springfield Police Department, it sounded like routine cleanup work. Trespassers, public intoxication, maybe a minor injury. Among the officers dispatched was Taylor's staff. The Illinois State Police would later mark this call as the earliest known incident in their investigation. At the time, it barely registered on anyone's radar. When staff and other officers arrived, their body cameras recorded the scene. Cold air, flashlights slicing to the darkness, the echo of voices bouncing off metal beams. The two women appear disoriented, stumbling slightly. One has a bloody nose. They explain they've been drinking with friends inside the factory when an argument broke out. They've lost their phones, their keys, everything. The footage captures staff trying to calm them down, offering reassurances, helping one woman steady herself. "Let's get you out of here," he says. "You don't want to be in this place." But as they begin the long walk back through the industrial maze, the dynamic subtly shifts. One officer helps one woman. Staff walks slightly behind with the other. Her words are slurred, her tone confused. "Why would I be married?" she asks him at one point, half laughing. He responds, "Why wouldn't you?" It's small talk on the surface, something that could easily be brushed off as harmless banter. But in the footage, his camera angle drops toward the floor, then jolts as he shifts it back up. Later, investigators would note this as the first red flag. His camera positioning becomes erratic, as if adjusting deliberately. A few minutes later, one of the women screams. She stepped on a nail, her bare foot punctured, blood seeping through her skin. The group stops. Another officer moves to help her sit. The body cam from that officer shows staff and the second woman lagging behind. The timestamp between recordings shows a gap, roughly 6 minutes, where staff's camera feed is missing. When his video resumes, the group has nearly reached the ambulance waiting outside. That 6-minute gap will become one of the most examined pieces of digital evidence in the case. According to internal police logs and later court records, staff manually turned off his camera while escorting the woman. When the recording resumed, she appeared agitated, tugging at her shirt and yelling. "You were all over me," she shouts in the footage. This is police brutality. The other officers seem confused, trying to calm her down. She's intoxicated, emotional, and her statements don't yet form a coherent complaint. Staff, meanwhile, remains silent for most of it, deflecting by calling her drunk and hysterical. Later, at the ambulance bay, she reportedly told paramedics that the officer who walked her out had touched her inappropriately. Her claim was dismissed that night, filed under incoherent due to intoxication. The department closed the call with no follow-up. But when the Illinois State Police reopened the case in 2021, that January report resurfaced. Detectives combed through camera logs, timestamps, and officer narratives. The 6-minute camera shutdown stood out like a flare. It matched the same pattern that would later appear in the March and April incidents. The sudden blackout during contact with female victim or suspect, followed by an allegation of sexual misconduct. One officer who was present that night gave an interview to investigators months later. He said, "I remember her saying something like, 'If I showed you my body, I'd go home, not to jail.' I didn't think she meant it literally. She was drunk, but now looking back, it sounds different." That officer admitted he found staff's behavior off and that he didn't like working with him. The official case summary prepared by the Illinois State Police later confirmed what the initial responding officers had missed. The intoxicated woman's claim of inappropriate contact aligned with the precise time gap in staff's camera recording. Investigators didn't have direct footage of the alleged misconduct, only the abrupt pause and her reaction immediately afterward. But taken together with later victim statements, the pattern became difficult to ignore. The January 2020 incident established a timeline of behavior that stretched beyond a single lapse in judgment. It suggested that staff had been testing the boundaries of his power months before the later assaults. The setting, two intoxicated women, isolated in a deserted industrial site, wasn't random. It offered privacy, plausible deniability, and vulnerable targets. When this call was revisited in the larger investigation, it showed that the officer's misconduct did not emerge from nowhere. It evolved. The January event was a spark. The first time he learned how easily a body camera could be turned off, how a few minutes of silence could erase accountability. For the two women that night, the encounter ended with citations for trespassing and public intoxication. They were taken to the hospital, treated, and released. Their names disappeared from the public record until detectives traced them again a year later. One of them confirmed that she had indeed accused staff of touching her, but said nobody followed up. She told investigators, "He laughed at me. I told him he did it, but they didn't care. The Illinois State Police investigators who built the case against staff later cited this call as pivotal because it revealed the earliest point when the officer's misconduct intersected with departmental oversight failure. There was no supervisor review of his missing footage, no disciplinary report about the shutdown. It simply passed unnoticed, a small crack in the system that widened into a chasm by spring. The Pillsbury plant case also became symbolic of something larger, how easily misconduct can hide behind procedure. On paper, the call was resolved. In reality, it was a first act in a slow, quiet unraveling, a night when rules bent and a dangerous precedent was set. Months later, when staff faced charges of official misconduct, custodial sexual misconduct, and criminal sexual abuse, investigators pointed to that 6-minute blackout as the first recorded instance of the behavior. It was evidence of intent, not accident, a deliberate silence in the middle of an officer's duty. In Springfield, the abandoned factory has long since been fenced off, a relic of the city's industrial past. But for those who study the case, it remains more than a building. It's a crime scene without a crime scene, a physical reminder how power can distort in the absence of oversight. The January night at the Pillsbury plant didn't just reveal what one officer did. It revealed how a system meant to police misconduct can fail when no one is watching. By the time the Illinois winter of 2021 crept in, whispers had already begun circulating within the Springfield Police Department. There were stories, quiet, uncomfortable ones, about Officer Taylor's staff, a 3-year veteran who, until recently, had been considered unremarkable. He wasn't the kind of cop that drew attention, neither celebrated nor condemned. But in the corners of roll call rooms and patrol car chatter, doubts began to spread. Officers who once dismissed rumors as street gossip started noticing small inconsistencies in his reports, strange gaps in camera recordings, and odd late-night returns to scenes that were already cleared. Those doubts reached the desks of superiors just as the Illinois State Police received a formal request for assistance. On February 18, 2021, the Springfield Police Department asked the ISP's Division of Criminal Investigation, Zone 4, to conduct a criminal investigation into one of their own. The department, bound by procedure and public pressure, needed outside oversight. Within days, a specialized investigative unit arrived, tasked with verifying a series of allegations that, if proven, would mark one of the most damaging scandals in the department's recent history. From the beginning, investigators understood they weren't dealing with a single complaint. When they opened the personnel file of Taylor's staff, they found at least 3 separate incidents flagged by dispatch logs that coincided with complaints from women. Each involved domestic disturbance calls or situations where staff was alone with female victims or suspects after other officers had left. The pattern was unmistakable. The incident spanned January 2020 to April 2020, each marked by a common element: a body camera that had gone dark. Investigators started with the April 22nd call, tracing it through digital evidence. The footage confirmed the officer's presence and actions up to a point, the moment his camera was shut off. In that silence, the misconduct was said to have occurred. From there, they moved backward, comparing timestamps from the March and January calls. Each revealed similar gaps, moments when accountability vanished into static. The Illinois State Police took no chances. They pulled every report filed by staff during that period, cross-references GPS coordinates, dispatch times, and body camera activity logs. Out of dozens of calls, several stood out for what they lacked: audio, video, or consistent end-of-shift documentation. Forensic specialists reconstructed the metadata, confirming that in multiple cases, staff's camera had been manually powered off before the call concluded. It wasn't a malfunction, it was deliberate. Then came the interviews. Detectives sat down with the victims, women who had either been assaulted or made claims of inappropriate contact. Some were hesitant. Some spoke in halting tones, fearing retaliation. Others, having heard of the investigation through word of mouth, came forward voluntarily. Their accounts were eerily consistent. Compliments that turned uncomfortable, questions about their bodies, the same assurances: no one will know, it stays between us. As their story spread to the investigative unit, another realization dawned. Staff had operated with alarming confidence. According to court documents later cited by local outlets, Investigators found that he had texted or called at least 2 of the women from his personal phone after official calls ended. These digital traces, combined with the women's statements, gave the state the leverage it needed to move forward with charges. Inside the Springfield Police Department, the tension was palpable. Officers who had once worked beside him were now being questioned by the Illinois State Police. A few admitted they had noticed red flags: his tendency to linger at scenes longer than necessary, his casual remarks about grateful victims, his late-night returns to homes that should have been cleared hours earlier. One officer later told investigators, "I didn't like working with him. There was just something about the way he was with certain women. He pushed boundaries." Within the chain of command, the revelation felt like betrayal. To many, it wasn't just about the crimes. It was about trust. The department, already under the microscope from earlier controversies in Illinois policing, now faced the possibility that one of their own had used the badge as a weapon. Chief officers knew that any delay or misstep could look like a cover-up. They cooperated fully with the ISP, handing over body camera databases, disciplinary histories, and internal correspondence. The arrest came on February 24, 2021, in the quiet of a suburban neighborhood on the city's outskirts. ISP investigators arrived with an arrest warrant signed by the Sangamon County State's Attorney. The charges were extensive: official misconduct, criminal sexual assault, and custodial sexual misconduct. Officers surrounded his residence, the same kind of modest home where hundreds of Springfield officers lived. When they led him away, his neighbors watched from behind curtains, confused at first, then shocked as word spread that it wasn't just an internal matter. It was criminal. News broke quickly. Local headlines the next morning read, "Springfield officer arrested on sexual assault, misconduct charges." The community's reaction was swift and visceral. Social media filled with outrage, disbelief, and sorrow. Victims' advocates released statements condemning the breach of trust. For those who had interacted with staff in routine settings, traffic stops, community policing events, the accusations felt impossible to reconcile. Yet the facts methodically laid out by the ISP left little doubt about the seriousness of the case. As the case entered its preliminary phase, prosecutors emphasized one word: pattern. They presented it as a connective tissue linking 3 different women, 3 different nights, and a single figure whose authority insulated him from immediate suspicion. They didn't need to prove every detail beyond a reasonable doubt at that stage, only to demonstrate that probable cause existed to charge him. The evidence, they said, was overwhelming: digital logs, body camera metadata, corroborating victim testimony, and witness accounts from fellow officers. Within weeks, additional counts were added: criminal sexual abuse and aggravated criminal sexual abuse, bringing the total to multiple felonies. Staff's bond was set at $250,000, and he was placed on immediate administrative leave pending termination. Springfield police leadership issued a terse press release acknowledging the arrest and pledging full cooperation with the investigation. Behind the scenes, they struggled to restore morale among officers who now felt tainted by association. Meanwhile, the victims, 3 women whose lives had been upended, waited in silence as the legal machinery turned. For them, justice wasn't measured in headlines, but in acknowledgement. Each one had once believed that reporting an officer would lead nowhere. Now, their words were being taken seriously by the highest law enforcement authority in the state. The investigation phase stretched for months. ISP agents built a timeline covering each encounter from January to April 2020, aligning every detail into a cohesive narrative. When the final case file was submitted to the Sangamon County prosecutor, it spanned hundreds of pages. It told a story of authority corrupted and oversight ignored, but also of perseverance, the courage of women who refused to be silenced, and the colleagues who eventually spoke up when they realized silence made them complicit. By the time the pretrial hearings began, the name Taylor staff had become shorthand in Springfield for what happens when accountability fails. The department implemented emergency reviews of its body camera policies, requiring supervisors to audit footage for unexplained interruptions. For the community, the arrest marked both closure and alarm. Closure because the man at the center of the allegations was finally facing justice. Alarm because his conduct had gone unchecked for so long. What began as whispers in the hallway of a precinct had become a statewide reckoning. The Illinois State Police's February 2021 investigation broke open a culture of silence and proved that even those with badges are not immune to the law. For the victims, it was validation. For Springfield, it was a wound that would take years to heal. And for the justice system, it was a stark reminder of a truth as old as policing itself. Sometimes accountability doesn't begin inside the department. It begins when someone from outside dares to look in. By the time the courthouse doors opened on that overcast April morning in 2025, nearly 5 years had passed since the first incident that set the case in motion. The world outside had changed. But for the victims who walked through those doors, time had stood still. Each step toward the courtroom was a reminder of every unanswered night, every unrecorded moment, every camera off that had left them without proof. But now, the evidence had caught up to the silence. Inside the Sangamon County Courthouse, the name Taylor staff no longer carried the weight of a badge. It carried the weight of betrayal. The former Springfield police officer, once tasked with protecting the vulnerable, now stood before a judge as a defendant convicted of preying on them. His face, once familiar behind the patrol car window, was pale and expressionless. His career was over, his uniform stripped, and the city that once paid him to uphold the law now watched him answer to it. After years of legal proceedings, plea negotiations, and evidentiary hearings, the court session on April 9th, 2025, marked the end of a case that had begun with hesitation and disbelief. Prosecutors announced that staff had pleaded guilty to 5 charges: aggravated criminal sexual abuse, custodial sexual misconduct, criminal sexual abuse, and 2 counts of official misconduct. Each count was tied to his conduct between January and April of 2020, the same months that investigators had spent years dissecting frame by frame, timestamp by timestamp. The plea agreement avoided the spectacle of a trial, but to those who followed the case closely, the quietness of the moment was more powerful than any courtroom drama. There were no outbursts, no grandstanding, no scenes of outrage, just a collective exhale, the kind that comes only after a long fight finally ends. During sentencing that July, prosecutors laid out the chronology one last time. How staff had used his position to approach women during official duties, how he'd shut off his body camera to conceal his misconduct, and how he'd later attempted to contact some of those women in private. They reminded the court that his actions didn't just violate law. They violated the sacred trust between police and the public. The defense didn't dispute the plea. They asked for leniency, citing time already served, nearly 998 days under pretrial detention and electronic monitoring. But Judge Jennifer Asher, presiding over the sentencing, made clear that the crimes extended far beyond the victims listed in the indictment. Every citizen who depends on law enforcement to act honorably is a victim when that trust is broken, she said. Her words cut through the courtroom stillness like a verdict of their own. On July 24th, 2025, staff was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison, followed by 1 year of supervised release. The sentence was a compromise, part punishment, part acknowledgement of the plea, but to those who had lived through the case, it was a reckoning long overdue. He was also ordered to register as a lifetime sex offender, ensuring that the record of what he'd done could never again be erased by silence or a missing video file. For the victims, the sentencing wasn't about vengeance. It was about validation, the official recognition that what happened to them had finally been believed. One of the women, whose testimony formed the backbone of the case, later told reporters that she felt seen for the first time. "When I first said something, nobody believed me," she said. "They said, he's an officer, he wouldn't do that. But he did, and now it's on record forever." In the weeks that followed, Springfield's police department released a public statement condemning staff's actions and promising reforms. The chief at the time, Kenny Winslow, pledged that body camera audits would now include random spot checks for unexplained shutdowns, and that all domestic violence calls involving female victims would require dual officer response whenever possible. It was a small but necessary shift, a departmental acknowledgement that the cracks in their system had allowed a predator to operate unchecked. Across Illinois, the conviction made headlines. Local networks like WICS News Channel 20, Fox Illinois, and the State Journal-Register covered the outcome with the gravity it deserved. Each article emphasized the same details: a once-trusted officer, multiple victims, and a chilling pattern of camera manipulation. For viewers and readers, the story felt like something out of a crime documentary, except this one wasn't dramatized. It had unfolded quietly, in real neighborhoods, among real people who believed they were safe. The Illinois State Police, whose months of investigation had led to the arrest and conviction, issued a final report commending the victims who came forward. This case is a reminder, it read, that law enforcement's legitimacy depends on transparency and accountability. When that is violated, justice must be swift and impartial. For the city of Springfield, however, the aftermath was complicated. In the public's eye, the badge now carried a faint stain, not because of one man's crimes, but because of the silence that had allowed them to persist. Community trust didn't collapse overnight, but it cracked. Residents asked hard questions. How many times had someone raised concerns that went unheard? Why did it take the intervention of state investigators for justice to begin? And what happens next time? If there's another officer, another silence, another unreported moment. Within the department, there were officers who felt betrayed, those who had joined the force to serve and protect, now forced to defend their integrity because of one man's fall. Some attended the sentencing quietly, sitting in the back of the courtroom as the judgment was read. For them, it wasn't about curiosity. It was about closure. "He made our jobs harder," one officer said later. "He took what the uniform stands for and made it something people fear." For the women at the heart of the case, healing would take longer than any prison sentence. They had each endured scrutiny, disbelief, and the heavy weight of confronting a man who once represented authority. But their courage became a foundation of legal precedent, one that underscored that no badge, no title, and no power can erase accountability. In the months after his sentencing, Taylor's staff was transferred from Sangamon County Jail to the Illinois Department of Corrections. There, his record followed him, not just as another inmate, but as a former officer convicted of violating the very laws he swore to uphold. He would serve out his term, under supervision, with his name permanently listed in Illinois' Sex Offender Registry. For Springfield, the story of Taylor's staff wasn't just a scandal. It became a lesson written in policy, procedure, and collective memory. It forced an entire community to confront an uncomfortable truth. Corruption doesn't always announce itself with violence or greed. Sometimes it hides behind politeness, professionalism, and a badge that says protect and serve. In the final court documents, beneath all the legal citations and sentencing terms, one line stands out. It's the judge's closing remark, recorded for the transcript. Justice cannot undo what was done, but it can ensure that silence is no longer an option. And that's what this story became, the end of silence.